Welcome back. So in the previous section, we created a new route slash register where we can register a user. So in this section, we will create a new endpoint or a new method view where we will handle the login of our user. So let's get started. So let's go to our user resource and let me close all the other resources or all the other files. Okay, so before we move ahead, so if you can see, so this was basically we were listing all the users, right? So that means this should not be residing inside this slash register endpoint. So let's move this out of our slash register endpoint. So this should be pretty simple. So let's copy this and let's add it here. So let's change this to from register to, let's say, user, and let's create a new class. Say, let's say class user. Basically this will extend the method view. And so let me move this inside this method view. Okay, so now we have this endpoint which is related to basically the user. Okay, so let me close this. We don't need the terminal. So in today's section, let's create a new route. Basically that will be of user login, where we'll be handling the login of a user. Okay, so this should be pretty simple. Let me copy this line again because this is always common. So here I can say login. Let's create a new class or the method view. Let's say class user login, and it will extend the method view. Okay, now since we're going to log in, so we should understand what will happen when a user login. So when a user login, the user will send the username and the password, right? So we know that we'll get an argument. So basically this part will be same, and also it will be a post method because we are going to get something from the client, and then we'll get as a user input or user data. So this part is pretty same, right? And also if you remember, like we need to get the user. Okay, so let's copy all this part, and now inside this what I can say is user. So from this user data I need to find the user from this username which is present in this user data. So I can say user equal to user model dot query dot filter user model dot username equal to user data of username. So what I'm doing here is I am doing a DB query by using the username. Okay, so if that exists, so we need to check if the user exists. So here what we have to do is we need to have two conditions. Okay, one, we need to check if the user exists, and two, we need to check if the password provided by this user is correct. So we can say if user, and here what I need to do is I need to compare the password. So it will be pb*256 dot verify, and here I'll share user data of password. I need to compare two hashes, the hashes of the password from the user data and the password inside our DB. So basically it will be user dot password. Okay, pass. So here let me explain you once again like what exactly it's happening. So using the user data, we are getting the username in this user data. So using that username, we've tried to find a user. Okay, and if the user exists, and here we're comparing the password which we get from the client and which we stored in our database. So if that matches, then we're going to let the user log in, else we will throw a invalid credential error. So in that case we can say abort, and we'll say 401, and message would be invalid credentials. Okay, so now let's implement this. So if the user exists and the password matches, so in that case what we'll do is, so we need to create an access token at this point. If you remember our JWT thing, so we create a access token only when the user exists and the password also matches, if it is a valid user. So let's create an access token. So this will be basically equal to, what we need to do is we need to import create access token from our Flask JWT extended. So let's say from Flask. So I think let me just copy paste. It will be much more faster. Let me copy this line, this code, this function, and let me say create access token. So here I need to pass an identity, which will be basically a user.id. Okay, and after that we'll return, we'll say access token is access token, and it will be success message of 200. Okay, so if you can see, what we have done here is we look for the user. So we do a DB lookup if the user exists, and if the password matches from the client, we are comparing the hash of the password which we get from the client, and also we are comparing the password from the DB. So if the password matches, then we are creating a token, access token, because we will need this access token to access our other resources on further request, right? And in that case, we created this access token and we send back to the client. In case the user doesn't exist and the password doesn't match us, then in that case, we are saying invalid credential. Cool, right? And one thing we should note here is like we have this create access token. So this part is where we are sending the information. So if you remember our JWT token, the payload part in our JWT, it contains sub, and it contains information, and it contains IAT, right? Issued at. So in this case, we should get all those fields as well as this newly added. So we shall check this in the next section. So far in this section, what we have done, we have moved out our listing of these users to its own method view user, and we create a new method view user login, and we handled our user login. If the user exists and the password matches, then we are generating an access token. Otherwise, we are sending a invalid credential error message. So in the next section, we will be protecting all the other endpoints by using JWT, because now we have a register endpoint, we have a login endpoint. So in the next section, we can protect all the resources, all the endpoints by using JWT. So see you there.